short while back, I stated that the Panasonic Lumix GM1 and the GM5 are quite possibly the best pocket-sized mirrorless cameras ever made. The only problem is, because these cameras are just so good, they're also in very high demand at the moment and therefore quite hard to buy at a price that won't make your testicles curl up inside you. But what if I told you that there's an alternative that'll instantly ease all of that testicular tension? It's just as pocketable, it's just as lightweight, and in some ways, it might even be better. And the best part is, owning one won't require you to start a GoFundMe page. Well, we're waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the Panasonic GF9, also known as the GX850 or GX800, depending on where you live in the world, but we'll talk more about that whole load of confusion a little later on. For now though, you might be sitting there scratching your head and wondering why you haven't heard about this camera already, and if it is actually better than the GM1, why aren't more people talking about it? Well, let's start with all the good stuff. Inside this GF9, it houses the exact same 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor as this GM1. So it provides the same color science, same dynamic range, and same level of clarity. So far so good, right? But it kind of gets better because rather than being just a Walmart version of the GM1, this camera also adds in its own list of extras that actually make it a much easier to use option than its older, more popular sibling. Like for instance, it actually includes a flip-up screen. Now originally, of course, this would have been designed to cater for the selfie-loving vloggers that ran rampant throughout the 2010s. Thankfully though, most of those people are either no longer on the internet or are on some kind of register, or both in some cases, so we don't need to talk or think about those people anymore. But the good news is that having a screen like this is actually great for waist level composition, making it a better choice for candid styles of photography like street and travel. The GM1 on the other hand has a screen that's more fixed in place than your dad's opinions on oat milk. Now, despite having the same sensor as the GM1, this GF9 is way more advanced in terms of video too. Now, as you can see, Panasonic were obviously very excited about all of this, and they ended up plastering 4K all over this camera for some reason. And that's because, well, spoiler alert, yes, this can shoot 4K video internally, which we'll obviously get into in more detail a bit later on, but for now, just know this. The GM1 can't. It was locked into 1080p HD only. Now, whilst this camera is slightly larger than the GM1, I actually kind of prefer it in some ways. Now, don't get me wrong, this GM1 is beautifully tiny, but for someone with larger hands like myself, it can also get a tiny bit fiddly. The GF9's larger frame provides just a bit more purchase, more breathing room for your thumb, and a touch more space between the button placements on the back. It's a small improvement, but an improvement worth mentioning nonetheless. But of course, this wouldn't be a fair fight without mentioning some of the negatives. The main point of contention, I feel, is going to be the build quality. This GF9 is made from noticeably cheaper materials and feels very plasticky. Solid plastic, sure, but plastic all the same. Meanwhile, the GM1 is well known for being a camera that made no compromises in that department and is made from a much more robust metal. Somewhat frustratingly, despite this being the larger camera of the two, Panasonic decided to swap out the full-size SD card slot for a micro SD. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I imagine it was all done in the name of cost cutting, given that the GM1 is smaller, yet still includes a proper SD card slot. But besides these few gripes, the GF9 clearly is the more tech-laden option, so with more features and a more practical design, surely it has to cost more than the GM1, right? Well, if you're paying attention, no. You can actually pick up this GF9 for less than the GM1, and in some cases, if you know where to look, you can get one for less than a third of the price. And that's exactly what happened to me, because I bought mine from a Japanese auction site using a website called Pricey, who were also kind enough to sponsor this video. Now, although they are the sponsor of this episode, I do genuinely use Pricey a lot when trying to find new cameras to test out for this channel, and that's because most of the time I can purchase cameras for way cheaper than they would otherwise cost me here on the North American market. However, as much as I love a good camera bargain, shopping for gear in Japan used to feel like trying to decipher an IKEA instruction manual in the dark, as not only is there a language barrier to navigate, but also it can sometimes be a total gamble as to whether the item that turns up will be in the condition you thought it was in or even turn up at all. Well, Pricey really simplifies all of that process because you can browse listings from sites like Yahoo Auctions, Mercari, and Rakuten, which are translated into English or a choice of other languages. You can then place a bid or just buy outright, just like many other auction sites. Then when you win, Buyee will pretty much handle all of the rest of the process for you, including shipping the item to their Japanese warehouse for inspection just to make sure you aren't being completely screwed over, then repackaging it and arranging forward shipping straight to your front door. Now, to give you an example of how much I saved by using Buyee, I picked up my GF9 here in very good condition for just under 42,400 yen, which is around $300 US. And that included a 14 to 42mm kit lens too. Now, I didn't actually want that lens, but after doing some research, I found that here in Canada, this lens sells for around $100 to $150 US on eBay, which means that once I've sold that on, I've essentially paid around $150 to $200 for the camera body only. Meanwhile, on eBay, you're going to be looking to pay around $300 to $380 for this camera body alone. So yeah, overall, I feel like I got a pretty good deal. So if you want to buy a camera without the need to sell a kidney, check out Buyee using the link in the pinned comment below. It's completely free to sign up and they'll even ship worldwide. Now, with all of that said, I do have a slight confession to make here. You see, whilst I've bought numerous cameras from Japan in the past, so far they've always let me switch the language from Japanese to English in the settings menu on the camera. Nice and simple. But not this time apparently. You see, the reason why this GF9 is also known as the GX850 or GX800 depending on your region is because Panasonic decided to release different versions of this camera for the various different regions they cater to. This GF9 version that I have is obviously the Japanese model, and unfortunately it doesn't include the ability to change the language at all. Well, unless you're willing to get your hands a little bit dirty. Thankfully, after some frantic Googling, I came across a way to get the menus to read in English, and it really wasn't all that hard to do, well, once you know how to do it at least. So now, with a bit of tinkering, this camera works just as well as the English version would.
Jurassic Park.
Don't worry, I'm not going to bore the piss out of you by explaining how I did all of that in this video, but for those who do actually want to know how I did it, I've gone to the effort of writing a full step-by-step guide on my website, so you can just click the link that I've pinned in the comment below. It's totally free to use and it won't give you any viruses. Well, probably. Anyway, with all of that sorted, it was finally time to head out and take some photos. So what's this thing actually like to shoot with? Well, surprisingly solid. The GF9 uses Panasonic's Contrast Detect DFD system, and whilst it's not going to rival the eye-tracking wizardry of the modern GH7, for casual shooting, it's more than fast enough. But what about video? Well, this is where the GF9 absolutely slams the GM1. We're talking 4K video capture up to 30 frames per second with full manual control, focus peaking, zebra warnings, the whole shebang. Sure, it's only 8-bit and there aren't any log profiles and there's also no mic or headphone inputs, but if you're someone who just likes to own a camera that can capture some decent 4K B-roll in a pinch, this thing is more than capable. Plus, by pressing this button up here, you can even get Panasonic's 4K photo mode, which shoots 30 frames per second and allows you to pull out the best stills in post. It's kind of like burst mode, but just on steroids. So we've got fairly decent autofocus and improved video specs, but what about the stills? Well, as I've already mentioned a few times, this uses the same 16 megapixel 4/3 sensor as the GM1, which we already know delivers pretty good images. But it goes one step further because this camera has had the anti-aliasing filter removed, so you can expect to deliver slightly crisper images straight out of the camera. You also get burst shooting up to 10 frames per second, which the GM1 can't quite keep up with, sadly. But of course, with only a micro SD card to write to, don't expect to rattle off hundreds of images at that pace. In fact, when shooting in RAW, the buffer does fill up quite quickly, so this really isn't a camera designed for keeping up with fast-paced action. But let's be fair, this was never designed for that purpose. It's a stealthy snapper and it's best suited to candid styles of photography, much like the GM1. Speaking of which, this camera also seems to feature the same shutter system as the GM1, and that means that you can shoot with a proper mechanical shutter up to 1/500th of a second. Now, using a faster shutter than this will automatically switch the camera over to the electronic shutter, which is a bit of a shame, but at least this tops out at 1/16,000th of a second, making it easier to gain shallow depth of field shots in bright sunny conditions. But anyway, if this is just basically a better GM1 with extra features, better ergonomics, and a lower price tag, then why aren't more people raving about this camera?
I don't
No.
Well, it's hard to say for certain, but I do have a theory. Now, the GF1 was launched in 2017, right as smartphones were really starting to eat into the compact camera market. And unlike the GM1, this GF9 unfortunately doesn't have the same allure as this with its premium build and ultra minimalist style. It's plastic, slightly bulkier, and in the world of cameras, photographers tend to love a status symbol. I mean, just look at the Fujifilm X100 5 and 6. They are both undeniably some of the best designed and beautifully crafted cameras of this decade, and a huge part of what made them sell like hotcakes is the fact that they look and feel expensive, mainly because they are very expensive, but that's besides the point. This GM1 kind of gets away with being small because it also taps into the same high quality energy as the X100. It's sleek, metal, and high quality. The GF9, well, it's kind of the more practical sibling, a super capable camera, but it doesn't quite turn heads in the same way, which is probably why we're still waiting for a successor over 8 years on. But this is the thing. The irony of all of this is that these days, the demand for a small, powerful, premium quality camera that doesn't cost the world is now becoming increasingly popular. I mean, the fact that this GM1 and the GM5 are both selling for well over their original RRP should attest to that. And so, if what you care about most is the actual usability, features, and value for money a camera can offer, then the GF9 might just be one of the best budget mirrorless cameras that nobody's talking about. Well, for now at least.